Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
Is marital enhancement a reason to worry or not? Today's story with a similar plot. Enjoy watching it. Sitting on the porch on a warm spring day, inhaling the smell of lilac and lavender and enjoying the taste of cold lemonade in my mouth, it was difficult for me to imagine that anyone would want to live differently than now. But, of course, people want to and do it all the time. At least some of them consciously exchange the promise of this life for something else poorer, something golden for something plastic. There was nothing particularly unusual about Megan's and my courtship. We met right out of college, dated for a couple of years, fell in love, and got married. There was no real drama, and almost everyone who knew us said they were sure we would get married from the moment we first met. We may not have been the modern-day Romeo and Juliet, but most people thought we made a great couple, and spending time with each other was easy and fun. We never got tired of each other, at least that's what it seemed to me. I guess our life as a married couple wasn't particularly remarkable either, but I was happy. She worked in publishing, and I got a good job as a programmer at a software development company. We rented half of a 2-flat house and were saving for a separate house. We had 2 cars, a big TV, and an aquarium with fish. We enjoyed the usual things, going to the movies, going out to dinner, dancing, and we had more than our fair share of bed. We were making plans for the great American dream, and as soon as we had enough money, we were going to have children. We talked about our future as if we could order it from a catalog. We wanted at least 2 children, a boy and a girl, and a house with a porch, a fireplace, and a large backyard with lots of shady trees. Life was good, and it seemed that everything would only get better. Our trajectory towards the fenced-in American dream was right on course until Megan met Teresa. Teresa worked in the copy-reading department at Megan's company. She was lonely and carefree, and Megan believed she led an incredibly interesting life. After they first met, I remember Meg coming home night after night and telling me everything about Teresa, what she said, what she wore, who she argued with, or what she did at some party. It didn't take long before Teresa became the de facto topic of conversation at dinner, after a movie, in the hot tub, whenever. To be honest, it didn't bother me at first, but after a while, I noticed that Megan wasn't just admiring Teresa's life, she was envious of it. She spoke enviously of the trips she went on with her boyfriend, of the carefree existence she led, attending parties and concerts, going to elite restaurants. The implicit message was that she wanted to have more of what Teresa had, and gradually, this message began to irritate me. Within a couple of months of them dating, Megan began inviting Teresa out to eat and hang out, and I was getting a first-hand dose of my wife's clear role model. I will be the first to admit that she is pleasant-looking. She has smooth olive skin, long black hair, a curvy, well-proportioned body, and dark, piercing eyes. But no matter how attractive she was physically, her character irritated me. She acted arrogantly and seemed to expect the people around her to wait on her. She often made caustic remarks about those outside her circle, and generally speaking, the vast majority of those she met were below her, and I am sure that included me. At first, it was not clear where this arrogance came from. She went to community college and certainly didn't seem like some kind of intellectual giant. Her job wasn't anything special, and she definitely didn't have a lot of money of her own. Sure, she was pretty, but she wasn't a supermodel, and there are many equally beautiful girls without that attitude. Honestly, all I could conclude is that her sense of superiority is directly related to her perception of being associated with a better class of people. She has a habit of talking a lot about the opinions, habits, and properties of the group of people she associates with, all of whom are directly or indirectly connected to some local tycoon named Gabriel Putnam. Teresa met Gabriel through a friend of his named Stuart, whom she met and started dating a year or so ago. Now, they both spent a lot of free time in Gabriel's house, which turned out to be a huge mansion on the outskirts of the city. As far as I could tell, Gabriel had no accomplishments of his own. Apparently, all his money came from being born into a family that controlled an obscenely profitable chemical company. And so, without any real responsibility, he managed to master the art of leading an idle life and apparently did his best to share his lifestyle with anyone he considered worthy of becoming his friend. Unsurprisingly, his mansion was the center of attention for all the beautiful people in town who would party there 5 or 6 nights a week. I soon realized that if you weren't used to Gabriel's house, you weren't really worth anyone's time, at least not in Teresa's little world. Judging by Megan's growing adoration for all things Teresa, it was clear to me that she was eager to spend the night at Gabriel's in the worst possible way. So, it was no surprise that she came home one Thursday in an incredibly manic mood after Teresa invited her to go to Gabriel's later that evening to introduce her to everyone. Clearly, I decided that I would go too. But when I asked what I should wear and what time we were going, Teresa made it clear that it was a bachelorette party and that I would be out of place. At that moment, alarm bells started ringing in my head, but they were weak enough that I didn't completely panic. The alarm grew significantly louder when I saw that Megan had emerged from her bedroom wearing a rather provocative black dress that showed off her legs and cleavage, and that she had her hair and makeup done. When she dressed up like that, she was breathtaking, and that evening, in a dress that showed off all her beautiful curves, she looked like a dream come true. With sandy hair, brown eyes, and pale skin, a cross between a peachy country girl and a bikini model dressed to the nines. In fact, she was so gorgeous that I felt sick at the thought of other men making plans to try their luck as soon as they saw her. I had an overwhelming urge to ask her to cancel the meeting or insist that I go too, but before I could think of a diplomatic way to broach the subject and express my concern, she was out the door with Teresa and on her way. After she left, I didn't realize right away that waiting at home while she was having fun would drive me crazy. So, I decided I'd better keep myself busy and thought I'd go to the football game with my buddies. My best friends were Greg Martin and Bill White, a couple of guys from our neighborhood whose company I could always count on. I had known Greg since college and Bill since we moved into the neighborhood. Together with their wives, Sally and Julie, we spent a lot of time together. The men often played golf or watched football together, and the girls often went shopping or even to the spa in pairs. We went to the movies, bowling, mini golf, and even went on vacation with the whole group a couple of times. Watching football in the evening with them wasn't unusual, but going to their house without Megan was definitely unusual. So, both Sally and Julie wondered what was the matter. I think my answer was pretty vague, so like dogs hovering around a cornered squirrel, they kept pressing until they got the whole story out. No one said anything special, but I noticed some raised eyebrows, and men nervously teased me about how my wife wanted to renovate the apartment. I laughed at the jokes but didn't really think it was that funny, and I'm sure everyone was starting to sense my discomfort. Megan returned home around 11:30 p.m. and couldn't stop talking about the people she had met and what a good time she had. She seemed slightly drunk, which didn't surprise me because she was never one to shy away from drinking a fair amount in social situations. It didn't take long before her enthusiasm for the evening began to irritate me. Of course, I understood that this was fun and interesting for her, but listening for several hours to her enthusiastic stories about the people she met at a party where I was not a welcome guest made me grind my teeth and look for an opportunity to change the topic. In her review of the party, several names were repeated over and over again. The ultra-wealthy Gabriel was apparently charming and witty, a gracious and generous host, lavishing food, drinks, and compliments on his guests. As a popular, attractive, super-rich bachelor, Gabriel played the role of a confirmed bachelor who was followed all night long by women of all ages. Not far behind him was a guy named Palmer, a local lawyer who seemed to be a very close friend of Gabriel's. Megan described Palmer as a dominant man, speaking with obvious admiration of how he dominated conversations and was the center of attention, even if Gabriel was in the room. Apparently, everyone knew him or had heard of him, and he was a pretty popular guy. And judging by Megan's smile and excitement as she recalled the evening, she was very flattered that he spent a lot of time talking to her. There was also Teresa's boyfriend, Stuart, who Megan said seemed a little younger and a little more playful. I think Teresa had been hanging onto him all evening, but Meg wasn't surprised because apparently public displays of affection were common among Gabriel's entourage. Over the next few days, I listened to her talk about what a great time she had, and a couple of times I came close to saying that I thought it was ridiculous to admire a bunch of socialites and their hangers-on. But I decided that it would sound bitter or envious, or both. In the end, my lack of answers must have been a signal, because she finally returned to talking about the mansion and its very interesting inhabitants and visitors. About a week later, she received an invitation again. This time, I insisted on going with her and was somewhat relieved when she didn't object. The mansion was located outside the city and was a huge pseudo-classical monster with porticos decorated with columns, statues, fountains, and a huge area. The house had a long driveway with perhaps 25 cars parked along it and on the adjacent lawn. Once inside, Megan showed me around. The mansion was incredibly huge, and the party took place throughout the entire grounds. People ate in the dining room, talked in the giant living room, played pool in the game room, sat in the jacuzzi, swam in the pool, or watched a movie in the media room. Indeed, people were everywhere, talking, laughing, gesticulating, drinking, and touching each other. We eventually found Gabriel and Palmer with half a dozen other people in a study off the main hall. She introduced me, and they seemed nice enough. Both Gabriel and Palmer looked to be about 40 years old, both were well-tanned, wore expensive clothes, cologne, and the like. Both had the easy, confident manner of men in complete control of their surroundings, and they moved from topic to topic with incredible ease and confidence. Anyway, they both greeted me quite warmly, chatted for a bit, asking about my work, education, and then politely moved on to talk with more interesting people, mostly a few nice girls, including Teresa and my wife. I might have looked a little lost, so someone brought me a drink and invited me to a nearby sofa where I sat with Megan and a group of 4 or 5 socialites for what I thought was a stunningly boring conversation about the merits of a holiday in Venice versus Florence, followed by comments on the appropriateness of the behavior of a number of models. I tried not to get distracted, but after half an hour, I lost my battle with boredom. Remembering the room with the TV showing a baseball game, I whispered to Megan that I was going to wander around a little longer, and she nodded in agreement. I spent the rest of the evening watching the game on the screen in high definition with another guy who was trying to marinate himself in duct tape. By the time the game ended, he was snoring, and I was more than ready to find Megan and go home. But finding Megan was not so easy. She was not in the study, nor in the dining room, nor in the living room, nor in any of the large rooms in the main hall. For a moment, I thought there were only the upstairs bedrooms left, but on my way to the stairs, I noticed her in one of the small patios off the kitchen and dining room. For a moment, and only a moment, I felt relieved that I had found her. But my relief poured out of me like a toilet flushing when I was able to take in the entire scene. Megan stood by the fountain, close to Palmer. He held a drink in one hand and grabbed her waist with the other, placing his hand on her butt. He laughed at something she said, paused to take a sip, and then lowered his head to kiss her neck. She laughed at what he was doing and half-jokingly lightly pushed him away with her free hand. I felt like my heart was going to burst. I rushed through the door to the patio, and in a matter of seconds, I was at the fountain. Hey, what the hell is going on?" I shouted, pushing his hand away from Megan and roughly pulling her away. Megan looked shocked, and Palmer reacted with a surprised look that turned into something that seemed vaguely funny. "I just like talking to your wife, there's nothing to worry about," he said. "Well, stop having fun, idiot. You know she's married, and we don't do that kind of stuff." I think he was trying to look conciliatory, but all I could see was his smirk. Megan started to blush as I led her away, and I thought it was because of her own embarrassment at being caught in a compromising situation. I realized how wrong I was when she hissed in my ear, "Matt, don't be in fifth place. Palmer is a friend and one of our hosts. You're overreacting. Seriously, you're embarrassing me, and you should apologize right now." I was stunned. I had nothing to say to that, so I muttered something about how he'd rather get a broken jaw from me than an apology and continued dragging her off the deck, through the house, and out to the car. We were both furious and were silent almost the entire way home. Finally, she turned to me and said, "What the hell made you humiliate me like that in front of my friends?" I answered, "Why the hell did you start kissing a guy in public?" "We didn't kiss, we were just flirting a little, and I don't see anything wrong with that. Your overreaction is what's all about." This argument continued for the rest of the trip, as we drove up the driveway to the house, as we got ready for bed, and right up until we both pretended to fall asleep. I was caught off guard by her behavior but completely stunned by how she defended him. I asked myself a million times if I was overreacting, if such things were really normal for a married couple, if I should somehow look at this from her point of view. But I couldn't and remained amazed that she considered behavior that was clearly out of bounds for me to be normal for her. How can we see the situation so differently? By the next morning, things were still a little chilly but had improved to the point where we could talk to each other. I thought about having a big conversation about last night, but I got lazy and decided to leave it as is. In fact, I think I talked myself into believing that she was so embarrassed by her behavior that she decided to downplay it. Otherwise, defending her behavior would make no sense to me. But when she received another invitation to Gabriel on Saturday, I quickly suppressed any thought of her going there. We've already agreed on a barbecue at Sally and Greg's, which I think should be a lot more fun, and it would be very rude to cancel the invitation. Besides, I was still shocked by her behavior on Thursday and really didn't want to give Palmer or any other guy another shot at attacking my wife. Unsurprisingly, Megan wasn't too happy with my decision and spent the morning sulking and grumbling. Her mood didn't improve at all when we arrived at the barbecue, and she refused to communicate at all. She answered in monosyllables more than usual, did not laugh or even smile, and sat alone at every opportunity. Finally, when she was alone in the house, I went inside to talk to her. "Hey, what the hell, Meg? You really ruined this party. Sally just asked if you were sick or something, and I had to just say you were in a bad mood. I know you're angry at me, but don't take it out on everyone present. You need to go out and at least try to have fun," I said. She gave me a sour look and said she wanted to go home. I asked her again to stay and try to have fun, and then she exploded. "Look, Matt, I know you like boring things like barbecues and boring conversations with boring people like Greg, Sally, Bill, and Julie, and you're perfectly happy to come to this boring place to have." She stopped mid-sentence because of a crash coming from the kitchen right behind us. We both turned to see Sally on her knees, desperately picking up the pieces of the serving plate. Apparently, she heard everything Megan said. "Sally, I'm sorry," I gasped, and Megan sat silently. Sally smiled painfully. "Oh, it's okay. It's a cheap plate," she said, picking up the last pieces, painfully pretending that we were both talking about the plate. We watched in silence as she left the room, and then sat for a few more moments saying nothing. Finally, Megan turned to me and began, "Look, Matt, I raised my hand to silence her. "You win. I'll let everyone know we're leaving. I'm sure it would be incredibly awkward if we tried to stay," I said. I went outside to meet our friends, whose conversation suddenly stopped when they noticed me on the veranda. I had no idea what to say, so I decided to say what everyone knew was not true. "Hey, guys, Meg isn't feeling very well, so I think we'll take a break and just go home." "See you later," I said. They all mumbled something about hoping she gets better and that we'll see each other soon. There seemed to be nothing more to do, so I took Meg and left. I was on edge the whole way home. I didn't say anything, realizing that if I opened my mouth, I'd explode. She sat quietly looking out the passenger window but didn't seem particularly remorseful. No tears, no attempts to apologize or make excuses, nothing that would make me think that she was repentant. I was so confused by her recent change in behavior that I didn't even know how to start a conversation about her behavior. So all I could say when we walked inside was, "You really can be a little sometimes, Meg." She looked at me defiantly and simply replied, "Now you know what it's like to be embarrassed in front of your friends." We spent the rest of the evening in silence. Over the next few days, there was a gradual thaw, and by midweek, it seemed like everything was back to normal. Or normal. We talked, laughed, watched TV, and had intim. But the new normal included Teresa. So Teresa came twice during the week, and she and Megan spent those evenings watching TV, listening to music, and talking. The only thing that didn't happen that week was a trip to Gabriel's. I thought maybe Meg thought she was going a little overboard because she didn't even ask for it. But the next week, she brought it up, and by then, I had cooled down enough to give the go-ahead. I don't really need another evening at the snobby house, but after what happened last time, there's no way I'd let her go alone. She made me promise that I wouldn't cause problems, and I made her promise that she would be more sensible with her flirting. The scene in the mansion was almost the same as before, only there were half as many people. Palmer and I managed to shake hands and apologize, and the evening descended into a series of elitist conversations that for me could not have been more boring. Megan was being nice and I was bored, so we agreed that I would leave early, and Teresa would take her home. Everything seemed to work well, and it became a once or twice a week pattern for a while. I would stay for an hour or so, talk a little, get bored, and leave early, and Teresa would bring Meg home later. Megan seemed happier, and I found myself adjusting. It seemed like a win-win. It was around this time that things started to heat up at work. There was an important update to some software that was already released late, and it turned out to be very, very buggy. I was removed from all my normal duties and tasked with fixing this glitch, and as usual, I didn't get much help. My boss made it clear to me that it would be great for my career if I could turn things around within a couple of months, and also suggested that if I couldn't, they might have to look elsewhere. So naturally, I knew I would be spending a lot of time at work, after hours, and on weekends. This was not the first time I had to spend a lot of time at work for an extended period of time, and I expected Megan to cause a row. In the past, when this happened, Megan would start swearing and make me promise to compensate her with a nice vacation or something like that. But this time, she didn't complain much and said she didn't mind if she could hang out with Teresa and the rest of her new friends when she got lonely. I probably should have had some serious doubts about this, and I probably did feel a little uneasy, but I knew that if I left her alone at home night after night with nothing to do, it would become a big problem. So I made her promise to behave and accepted the idea that she would often spend time at Gabriel's without me. Over the next few months, I worked on the project, not only getting rid of bugs but also making a couple of updates to the code itself. I was happy with my job, and so was my boss, so everything was good at work. Everything was fine at home too. Meg and I didn't fight at all, and when we had time to be together, we got along great. Indeed, apart from the limited time we spent together due to work, everything was almost the same as before Teresa arrived. Maybe the only thing that was a little different was the night. What we did and how we did it hadn't changed much, except that Megan was now truly into the atmosphere. She made sure that candles were burning, flower petals were on the bed, or pleasant music was playing. To be honest, things like that didn't turn me on, but she also started wearing underwear before and sometimes during intim, and I loved it. Corsets, catsuits, heels, leather, she wore all kinds of lingerie, and it was all like meth for my libido. Seriously, just the mental image of her laying on the bed in some nicely lingerie and maybe a thin layer of oil on her body was enough to send me completely over the edge. In the middle of work, of course, I didn't want to upset the apple cart, but I wanted to know how the outfit change happened. So one evening, after a particularly hot session during which she wore a hot corset, I had to ask where she bought it. I bought it with Teresa at the lingerie store. "Do you like it?" she asked. "In fact, I really like everything you wear to bed lately." I hesitated slightly. "What inspired you to start wearing these outfits?" "Oh, mostly conversations with Teresa. She always dresses up for Stuart, and after hearing the results she was getting, I wanted to give it a try," she smiled. "You didn't seem to mind, so I continued in the same spirit," I said, looking at the way the corset lifted her breasts. "You see, Teresa isn't so bad. You should be gentler with her. She knows what she's talking about when it comes to the bedroom, and that's good for you," she said. "Yeah, I guess I can't argue with that," I said, watching her breasts rise and fall over the corset along with her breathing. Very briefly, an alarming thought flashed in the back of my mind. What if I'm not the only one benefiting from Megan's newfound love of lingerie? Well, after a couple of months, I finished debugging and refining the program, and it was finally released. Proving to be so successful that my bosses promoted me, gave me new responsibilities, and a raise in salary. However, the trade-off was that even though I was working less than during the debugging crisis, my hours were still longer than before. Thus, to some extent, we continued to work according to the pattern that had developed in previous months. We had a little more time to spend together, but if I had to work late, Megan would go to Gabriel's party, which usually happened a couple of times a week. Valentine's Day was approaching, and I got it into my head that I wanted to buy Meg more underwear. She loved wearing it, and I liked looking at her in it. This seemed like a great idea. So when I came home a little earlier than expected one evening and found a note saying she was out with Teresa, I decided it was a good time to go shopping at the lingerie store. Megan had a particularly nicely black corset that I was delighted with, and I decided that I would like to see her in red. But finding the right size for clothes is always a problem for me, so I decided it would be better to look at the tag on the corset or even bring it to the store to compare before buying anything new. The problem, however, was that I couldn't find the damn thing. I looked through all her drawers, in the closet, in the laundry room, basically everywhere. I sat there trying to decide where else it could be when a disturbing thought came into my head. Maybe I can't find it because right now it's on her. At first, I dismissed the idea, but the more I thought about it, the more likely the possibility seemed to me. Then an even more terrible thought came: if she wears it, then for whom and what are they doing? My mind was now racing between the belief that she was having fun with some man at Gabriel's and the decision that I was being paranoid and that there had to be some other explanation. Eventually, the suspicious part of me began to win. I called her cell phone, but it went to voicemail. Then I called Teresa's phone, and it also went to voicemail. I couldn't think of any other way to find out what was going on other than to find Megan and find out what she was doing, and that meant going to Gabriel. I hesitated for a couple of minutes, wondering whether I should look for her and confront her, but in the end, I realized that I had to find out everything. I got into the car and drove to Gabriel. When I pulled up to the house, there were only half a dozen or so cars parked in the driveway. When I saw that one of them belonged to Megan, I knew I was on the right track, but my heart sank to my stomach, and I felt like my life was starting to fall apart. I parked, walked leisurely up the driveway, and knocked on the door, which was opened by Jordy, a huge, affable black man with a shaved head whose job was to keep things quiet and safe. I thought about pushing past him to get in, but although I'm a pretty big guy, Jordy is 4.5 kilos more muscular than me, and I knew I wouldn't get far. I decided to act as calmly as possible, said hello, chatted a little, and pretended that they were waiting for me. He recognized me from previous visits and did not interfere when I walked past him into the house. As casually as possible, I began searching for any trace of Megan. I checked the courtyards, offices, and living rooms. Entering the kitchen, I saw Teresa and Stuart sitting at the table, drinking wine and eating some kind of cheese. Both were dressed in robes, and Teresa's hair was uncharacteristically disheveled. Everything about them seemed post-coital. When I entered the room, she raised her head, her mouth open in surprise, and I thought there was a hint of concern in her gaze. "Teresa, where's Megan?" I asked as coldly as possible. "I'm not sure she's even here." "I thought she was probably at home," she answered nervously. I snorted and gave her an incredulous laugh. "Try again, Teresa." "I know she's here." Trying to formulate another lie, Teresa gave it all away when I saw her eyes flick nervously towards the stairs that I knew led to some of the guest rooms above. I gritted my teeth, quickly moved towards the stairs, and began to climb 2 steps at a time. "Matt, stop. Matt, don't." Teresa almost begged. At the top of the stairs was a hall with half a dozen doors on either side. I had no choice but to try them all. I carefully opened the first door and saw a lump lying on the bed in the darkened room. My eyes adjusted, and I realized it was just some guy dozing. The next 2 rooms were empty, but in the fourth, there was a couple lying on the bed. The room was as dark as an expensive restaurant, so it was difficult for me to make anything out. The only real light came from the half a dozen candles at the headboard, as well as the faint light coming through the window and the minimal light from the door I had just swung open. As I slipped into the room, the couple on the bed did not react at all, and I thought that they either did not hear me or were so accustomed to the occasional glance of people that they simply were not frightened by the thought of a temporary or accidental spectator. As my eyes adjusted, I could see the woman's back slowly, rhythmically rocking her pelvis on the man beneath her. She leaned towards him, supporting her weight on her arms on either side of his neck. They made very soft murmuring sounds. The room smelled of oranges, candles, and intim. A thin film of sweat glistened on her back, and her blonde hair hung down and touched the man's face. I looked closely at the woman and caught the expression on her face in the candlelight. As she turned slightly, she looked like Megan. I stepped closer, and my foot touched something on the floor. Looking down, I recognized her black corset. My heart sank. I leaned my back against the wall, felt for the switch, and turned on the light. Megan quickly turned and looked at me. First, I saw irritation, then surprise, then something else, maybe fear, but I'm not sure. She rolled off the man, and I saw it was Palmer, sweaty, excited, and more than a little annoyed. Megan sat close to him, looking directly at me. She was completely without clothes, glistening with sweat, her hair was down, and her face was flushed from intim. She began to speak haltingly, with hints of anger and worry in her voice. "Matt, why are you here?" "I came to see my wife," I said decisively. "It's good to see you, dear." We stared at each other, searching for something, anything that would make this situation understandable or acceptable. I saw that she was on the verge of tears, and although I didn't realize it at the time, I think I had already crossed that line myself. But along with the pain, I felt anger growing inside me, white-hot and explosive. I felt my fists clench, my jaw clench, and my nostrils flare. I purposefully stepped towards the bed, towards Palmer, and saw fear in his eyes. I realized that I was going to beat him until he lost consciousness, to cause him the same physical pain that he caused me. But when I approached the bed, a large black hand grabbed me by the shoulder and turned me around. Suddenly, Jordy was in front of me, looking angry and determined. I pushed away from him to take a step back towards the bed, but he grabbed me in a bear hug and dragged me out of the room. I managed to grab his shoulders, throw him to the floor, and we struggled for a moment. For a moment, I managed to free myself and move towards the bed again, and when Palmer saw this, he hid behind Megan like a little boy. But Jordy caught me again, and this time was able to pull me back into the hallway. He pressed me against the wall and spoke in a quiet, serious voice. "I can't let you do this, boy. This is my job. But think for a second, just think. This guy is certainly a first-rate jerk, and sending him to the hospital will probably make you feel better for a while, or worse. But is it worth a prison sentence? Is it worth it? Will anything change if you hurt him, or will you kill? Think, boy, think." I continued to struggle with him for a minute or two, but his words penetrated my soul. I wouldn't achieve anything by talking or fighting. My shoulders slumped in surrender. That was all I could say. I looked into his eyes and nodded. He let me go, and I walked down the corridor. Almost at the end, I turned and saw Megan at the door in a robe, looking after me. "Sorry, Matt," she said. I answered and saw tears gathering in her eyes. She didn't follow me. When I walked down the stairs, at the bottom of the stairs, I ran into Teresa, still in her robe. She looked concerned. "Don't do anything rash, Matt. She loves you. Do you love her? Don't ruin it all." I looked at her and laughed bitterly, without answering anything. I left the mansion, got into the car, and drove home. When I got home, I felt defeated. I didn't have any thoughts about what I should do now. Pack your things and leave? Should I pack her things? Wait until we have a serious conversation? Hire a lawyer? Get a gun? Lying on the couch and staring at the ceiling, I obsessively and unproductively considered the merits of all the options, my mental indecision playing against the confused emotional backdrop of anger and heartache. Time flew by, and I was still lying on the sofa when Meg came home about an hour later. Her arrival freed me from having to make a decision about what to do next. The option of a big discussion was the first step. She was crying and had no makeup on, but her hair was damp, and I knew she had taken the time to shower. I stood up as she entered the living room, and she carefully sat down in the chair opposite the sofa. She looked at me with sadness and uncertainty, and I thought that perhaps she decided that I would start the conversation. At that moment, I didn't know what to say, so I waited for her. "Matt, I'm sorry you saw that. I know how much it must hurt, and I'm sorry. I never, ever wanted to hurt you like this. You know this, right?" I was processing the little she had just said. "I'm sorry I saw this. I'm sorry it hurt." I didn't hear any regret that she did it, or even a hint that it was a mistake that would never happen again. It took me a minute to calm down and gather my thoughts to answer. "Well, it really hurts. It really hurts." I looked at her reaction, but nothing changed. I realized that I had to know what she was really thinking, about what she was planning, because any plans I had were completely dependent on her. I felt that she had all the cards in her hands. "So, Meg, what will you do? Will you take your things and move in with him?" She looked shocked and responded aggressively. "No, Matt, God, no." She paused. "I love you. I love being your wife. I feel bad that I hurt you. I want everything to remain as it is." I could see that she was sincere, but something about the way she spoke bothered me. What do you mean you want everything to remain as it is? She looked down, biting her lip and fiddling with her fingers. It seemed to me that she was not sure what she wanted to say. Listen, Matt, you're all emotional right now, and I don't think now is the best time for this. You've got it right. I'm pretty damn emotional right now, and I guess you could say I want to clear something up. I practically spat out the words at her. She seemed a little afraid of my aggression and anger, but her eyes did not leave mine. Okay, what do you want to know, Matt? Well, first of all, what the hell is your relationship with Palmer? Are you in love with him or what? And next, what exactly do you mean when you say you want to leave everything as it is? She still looked uncertain and awkward, but now I saw something else in her eyes, something like a challenge. I wouldn't say I'm in love with him, not like I'm in love with you. Maybe it's a kind of love, I suppose, but a kind of love? What the hell is love, Meg? The love that a married woman can feel for another man, what is it? Because I would really like to know. You can love more than one person, Matt, and not equally. I'm married to you, but I'm not locked in some emotional prison where I can't connect with others. Oh my God, Megan, what the hell are you talking about, connect with others? I just caught you in bed with another man, not giving free food to the poor or buying Christmas presents for mom and dad. What kind of damn love allows a married woman to jump into another man's bed? She looked as if she was searching for the right words. I was furious and increasingly impatient, and I think she saw that her responses were making the situation worse. Our relationship means a lot to me, and to him. I enjoy his company, and he enjoys mine. He fills my life. What are you talking about? At that moment, I was practically screaming. You sound like you're not even sorry that you had a night with him. You speak as if this is normal, acceptable behavior. Normal, Matt? What the hell is normal? She was now becoming a little aggressive, and the way she defended herself with defiance and anger confused and upset me. Is it normal to artificially limit all your romantic feelings to one person for the rest of your life? Is this okay, Matt? Yes, I think that's exactly it. What I mean is that it's normal for you to sleep with the person you're married to. You save that kind of love for your husband. It's okay, Megan, this is what married people do. What the hell is expected? I breathed heavily and looked at her in disbelief, and then she continued. Oh my God, Meg, it sounds like you want things to go on, that you want both of us at the same time. Is this what you mean by I want things to stay the way they are? You can't seriously believe that this is possible. Listen, Matt, like I said, you're very emotional right now, and you're not in a place to think rationally. She waited a second, perhaps thinking I would interrupt, but I let her continue. My relationship with Palmer does not and will never affect my relationship with you. There is no real reason why I cannot have a close relationship with both of you. And if you love me and care about my happiness, I think you will sacrifice your pride, which is the only thing you would have to sacrifice, and allow me to see Palmer. She spoke in a measured voice, and her words sounded as if she were delivering a rehearsed speech. Perhaps this is true. Matt, couples do this all the time. Maybe, but as far as I understand, such people are not really devoted to each other, not even married. You know it. You know I don't get all these open marriages. In fact, once upon a time, you thought exactly the same thing. I'm not talking about an open marriage where we go out and have intim with whoever we want. You're trying to trick me because I'm pretty sure I saw you having a night with Palmer. I don't want to sleep with just anyone. I just want a relationship with Palmer. And you. I want to be your wife and his. What is it? His accessible girl? She bit her lip, thinking. I don't know, probably his mistress. I want to be your wife and his mistress. It's been that way for the last month or so, and that's what I want in the future. I was speechless, staring at her with my mouth and eyes open in surprise and disbelief. Finally, I found some words. His mistress? Do you want to be his mistress? You know, Meg, this isn't the 18th century. We're not living in Versailles, and Palmer isn't some lord. Now I was standing, took a step towards her, and pointed at myself. And you know what else? I'm not some spineless dandy willing to put up with this crap. I'm not going to flush my self-respect down the toilet just so you can play Marie Antoinette or whatever the hell you want to be. At this point, I was so angry, confused, and frustrated that I felt completely out of control. I couldn't take it anymore and knew that if I kept arguing with Meg, the situation would probably get worse. For the first time in my life, I understood how a man could hit a woman, and I didn't want to cross that line. "You know what, Meg?" I finally said, moving towards the door. "I'm leaving." I ran out of the house, got into the car, and began driving aimlessly around the city. I finally stopped at a bar and had a few drinks, but my mood only got worse. By this time, it was already well after 2 o'clock in the morning, and my mind was practically tormented by memories of the fight with Meg. At this point, I really wanted to stop thinking about it and somehow get some sleep. Benadryl always throws me off, so I bought some at the pill store and checked into a motel. With the help of alcohol, the late hour, and Benadryl, I finally managed to fall asleep despite everything. The next day, I woke up around noon, and it took me a few minutes to get my bearings. It's Saturday. I don't have to go to work. I'm at the motel because I had a fight with Meg. The quarrel occurred because she wants to continue sleeping with her lover. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, my heart began to ache, and a fire flared up in my head again. Feeling terrible feelings of loneliness and rejection, I tried in vain to find some meaning in my situation, almost passing out from anxiety. I realized that I was desperate for perspective and advice. I needed a friend. Like a robot, I went to Bill and Sue. When I arrived, they immediately realized that something was very wrong. I looked and sounded like a wreck, which felt right because that's exactly how I felt. Bill brought me a beer, and we sat together in the living room. Even though the fight with Meg was on my mind, it still took me a while to tell Bill what had happened. It was painful to talk about. It hurt my pride. It was painful to admit that the woman I loved turned out to be completely different than I thought. It hurts to admit that another man could lay claim to her. Bill listened carefully to the story. He didn't rush and didn't ask many questions, but the whole time I was talking, he shook his head in bewilderment. I was on the verge of tears and stopped several times to pull myself together. "How are you feeling now? Will you be okay tonight?" "I don't know, Bill. Honestly, I probably feel like crap, but I think I can control myself." "How do you feel about Meg? Disappointed? Ready to kill? To reconcile?" What I thought about this for a minute. Probably a lot of things. I'm furious at what she did. I think I'm also humiliated, in a way. She knows that I will not put up with the fact that she has a lover. She knows it, so I guess it's like she really just left me for some other guy. Bill shook his head. "She didn't leave you, Matt. She abandoned herself. She left who she was before and became someone else. She is no longer the same as before." "I think so, Ted thinks so, and so do the girls. The current Meg is really not the same woman you married." This made a lot of sense to me, and I nodded, thinking about his words. Bill patted me on the knee, stood up, and said, "Wait a second." He went into the kitchen, came back with a card, and handed it to me. It was the business card of a lawyer named Charles Taylor. "Look, I don't know if this is necessary, but I think you should at least think about some legal issues." "This guy is pretty good," Bill explained. "He helped my brother-in-law with his divorce, and I think he'll do the same for you. As far as I can tell, if it comes to divorce, the two of you shouldn't have much to fight about, so you won't even need a lawyer. But if her boyfriend is a lawyer, I think you'd be better off calling someone like this guy to even things out, just in case." What he was saying made sense to me, and I told him I would call Taylor on Monday morning. I stayed with Bill and Sue until almost midnight, and declining an invitation to stay the night, drove back to the motel and fell asleep there. The next morning, I went home to pack my clothes and belongings. Meg wasn't home and left a note explaining that she tried to call me but couldn't because I left my cell phone at home. She asked me to call her and said that she took her things and moved so that I wouldn't have to. She spent half a page apologizing for what I found out and again trying to explain that she really thought we could save our marriage even if she remained in a relationship with Palmer. She promised that I would get all her attention and love that I needed. Finally, she asked me to call her so we could talk some more. I thought about what she wrote. I thought about who she had become. I thought about her request to talk but didn't see the point in it. I didn't answer calls. I looked at the TV, not understanding what I was seeing, listened to music, curled up in a ball, and tried not to cry. In the end, I managed to get some sleep and put the worst weekend of my life behind me. As planned, I called Charles Taylor on Monday morning. I was able to get an appointment a few days later and took a couple of hours off work to meet him. Luckily, his office was quite close, so it was easy for me to get there and back without missing a lot of work. Taylor primarily handled divorce cases, and from what I heard, usually got pretty good results for his clients. He was not a scorched earth man, but he had a reputation for defending his clients' interests without starting a war. I was angry, of course, but if I was going to start exploring legal remedies, I wanted to make sure I didn't burn any bridges in case Meg came to her senses, and I changed my mind. We analyzed the facts of our marriage. How long have we been married? What do we have in the bank? How much do I earn? How much does Meg earn? What do we own? He said that the reason for the divorce doesn't really matter, especially since we don't have children. I could be a Satanist with a methamphetamine addiction, or she could be a woman of easy virtue who constantly brings home intimate transmitted diseases, and it wouldn't change the outcome much. However, he wanted to hear my story. I didn't know if he was just curious or if he thought history would help him decide how he should introduce me, so I took my time and told him about the events of the last few months. He listened quite attentively and nodded or shook his head to indicate agreement or disagreement with what I was saying. When I mentioned Palmer's name, a look of recognition appeared on his face. Are you talking about Palmer Atkinson? Yes, about him. Do you know him? I think he's a lawyer. Of course. We studied together at law college in the same class. He paused for a moment, deciding whether to provide any more information. You know his real name is Peter. He goes by Palmer because he thinks it sounds more sophisticated or something. No, I laughed briefly. I think for him, it's all about looks. Yes, mostly. He's not the type to work hard. I'm sure he finished at the bottom of our class, and I highly doubt he ever passed the exam. As far as I heard, he never practiced law. I was a little surprised when I heard this. He seems to live a luxurious life, nice clothes, a nice car. How does he earn money? Yeah, well, his wife is sort of an heiress, so I guess he won the marriage lottery, so to speak. I was stunned. His wife? He is married? Is it true? What the heck, Taylor? Sorry, I thought you knew about it. Yes, I'm sure he's married, or at least I'm sure he was married. He sat back down. Do you think it would matter to Megan if she didn't know? Maybe. Still, being married didn't mean much to her, so maybe not. Now, I need to think about one more thing. If she didn't know, did it matter to Megan that he was married? If so, does it matter to me if, at this point, she wants to come back? I had doubts about both questions until I remembered some of her words from our confrontation. Couples do this all the time. She knew, and she didn't care. I spent the next few days in continuous, forced isolation. I kept my cell phone turned off and refused to answer calls to my home phone. Megan left half a dozen messages, saying we need to talk and asking me to call back, but I just didn't see the point. I read the letters she sent. They were long, complex, winding, and tried to make me see everything from her point of view, painting the picture that our life together would not be so different if she had some kind of hobby on the side and that I could be free to do what I like without her interference. She mentioned that she views her relationship with Palmer as self-limiting, that it's something she needs for a while but she can't know how long it will last. I continue to be perplexed by writing that night with another guy is not a side hobby like a club but a behavior that few married men are willing to consider. She completely rejected what other couples do, arguing that we should not be slaves to convention, and again wrote that her relationship with Palmer would not take anything away from us. She tried to compare her physical relationship with Palmer to the full-body massage I arranged for her during a vacation we took about a year after our wedding, saying it was different than what we had between us, no better and no worse. She further noted that he has interests in common with her, such as travel and cultural activities, which I do not share, and that her relationship with him helps her satisfy these interests. She claimed that her relationship with him was somewhat similar to the ones I had with Bill or Greg because we had common interests in sports that she could not share with me. At that point, I became so upset that I stopped responding, and as with her phone calls, I began to ignore her emails. I felt like I had to do it. It felt like we were speaking different languages. About a week after my visit, Teresa came to see Charles Taylor. She showed up right after I got home from work, dressed in jeans and a winter jacket, sunglasses on, a knitted cap. I decided not to invite her in. "What do you need, Teresa?" I asked sharply. She looked at me with barely contained hostility. "Why don't you talk to Megan?" "I think we've already said everything we wanted, Teresa. At this point, I have all the information I need, and I honestly don't want to hear any more about her relationship with Palmer or how she wants to be his or how I should be very happy to put up with this crap. I wonder what kind of woman Palmer's wife is that goes along with this crap." I deliberately used a harsh tone, trying to make it clear to Teresa that I was hurt and angry and, in any case, not in the mood to make up. But she was not stunned. "You know, Megan actually knows his wife, Matt. They get along well. In fact, they understand each other very well because she herself has several boyfriends. She lets Palmer do what he wants to be happy and gets the same attention herself. She's just not a possessive fifth place like you." Teresa thought for a moment and then softened her voice a little. "Look, Matt. Meg loves you, and you love her. And just because she has an interest in another guy, you let your ego get in the way and try to ruin a perfectly good relationship. It won't be good for anyone if you continue like this, really. Teresa, is that all you can say?" This is pretty much the same argument Megan used last week, so I'm a little curious. Are you using her words, or is she using yours? I really wanted to know the answer to this question. So much of this is Teresa's influence, and so much of this is the hidden fantasy that Megan has always had, but which I just didn't know about. Did Megan mutate into another Teresa, or was this alternate personality always there, just waiting to come out under the right circumstances? However, I didn't get any hint from Teresa, because she completely dismissed the question. What difference does it make who uses whose words? The fact is, just because you can't accept the fact that Megan has some needs that you can't meet, you're ready to torpedo your entire relationship. It actually looks pathetic. I knew she was trying to get under my skin by saying I couldn't meet Meg's needs, and to be honest, that's exactly what happened. Intim with me obviously wasn't enough to satisfy her physically, and my social skills weren't enough to pass the test either. But to call my objections to her novel pathetic was too much. I had been building up anger and frustration throughout our conversation, and it all came out like a hot geyser as I launched into a torrent of bitter and hurtful words. It's a pity. Is it pathetic that I expect fidelity from my wife? Indeed, how about Teresa? How about someone who can't stay true to their wedding vows? Is pathetic. What about the idea that the real way to ruin a supposedly loving relationship is to have night with someone outside of it, Teresa? And speaking of needs, what if Megan has a need that neither Palmer nor I can satisfy? What then, Teresa? Will she take a third lover? And if that one isn't enough, will she get a fourth? Hell, maybe she should just post her needs on Craigslist and find the perfect to satisfy each one. What about it, Teresa? She can get one guy who will be very hard on her in the place where they sit, and another who will be very romantic to look after her, and some rich guy who will buy her all sorts of expensive things, and another guy with a very long tongue that will have night with her, caressing her intimate place. Teresa finally interrupted me. You're taking everything to some ridiculous extreme. Why can't you just accept your current reality and decide what she wants right now? She seemed to be trying to reassure me by pretending to be reasonable or sophisticated, but I didn't believe it. I'm sorry, but Megan crossed the line of extremes when she decided that she needed to have two men and expected me to agree with it. This is wrong, Teresa. This is simply wrong. I stopped and thought for a second, catching my breath, and when Teresa didn't respond, I started over. And how about my needs? How about one of my needs is to have a faithful wife who is so devoted to me that she doesn't have intim with other guys? How can I satisfy this need in this little relationship you have in mind for Meg and me? By the end of my second tirade, Teresa was visibly upset again. Matt, what the hell would it change for you personally if Megan spent some time with another guy other than a blow to your pride? Are you really going to force Megan to make a choice? Because I don't really think you can get her to give up Palmer right now, and even if you could, she'll be mad at you forever, and she might end up dating him or someone anyway, something like him. Why force her to make this choice? Why can't you be happy with what you have now, with what you've had for the last couple of months? Were you really that unhappy? I was tired of arguing. I was sick of Teresa. In reflecting on her words, I realized that neither she nor Meg realized in what state my mind is in. Suddenly, the choice seemed clear to me, and I shook my head and said in a humble voice, I'm not going to force Megan to choose. Teresa seemed a little puzzled and maybe a little hopeful that she had managed to get through to me. No, I am not going, I pointed towards the kitchen. Wait a second, I have something I want you to take to Megan. I quickly walked into the kitchen, took Charles Taylor's business card, and returned to Teresa at the door. Here, give this to Megan. This is my lawyer's business card. If she stops by his office in the next couple of days, she could sign the divorce without having to be served at work. This will save her from embarrassment. Teresa stared at the card in disbelief. Wait, what is this? I thought you just said you weren't going to try to get Megan to give up Palmer. I shook my head in mocking disbelief. You and Meg just don't get it, do you, Teresa? No, I'm not going to force her to choose, because there is no choice anymore. I think you both think there's some kind of negotiation going on, but that's not the case. The marriage is over, and I think it happened when she slept with Palmer. And honestly, if it hadn't been done when I saw how much she disrespected me for thinking I'd agree to it, well, that pretty much made everything absolutely final. Teresa's surprised look gave way to understanding and perhaps a little fear. You're not even going to fight for your marriage? People are working on these at this point, I just laughed. As far as I understand, there is no need to fight for marriage. Understand, Teresa, the marriage is over, and there will be no more choices or negotiations. Please be sure to explain this to Megan because frankly, I don't want to talk to her anymore. Teresa watched, stunned, as I slowly closed the door in her face. What do you think of our first part of the story today? In my opinion, the wife did the most cruel and unreasonable thing without consulting her man before her actions. What's your opinion? Write in the comments. Until new video.